Murray, want to get your take on the Hall of Fame voting and inductions, or planned inductions that occurred yesterday. Obviously, you're not going to dispute Griffey and Piazza. Okay, well, what do you think?
Well, I think they're two of the most exciting and most deserving members of the Hall of Fame in recent time. In fact, in my opinion, Ken Griffey would have been close to being the greatest player of all time had he not played with such abandon and run into the wall on at least 2 or 3 occasions, which kept him out for extended period of times. He certainly played more than 20 seasons, and he's 6th on the all-time home run list. But I think he would have been very close to number 1 in home runs, and he was just a spectacular player.
That's interesting. And also remember, he never won a World Series, though I don't know if you can really hold it against one particular player there.
Well, that's true, but he didn't play with top-flight teams that were really contenders for a lot of his career. He was on teams that had a shot at it, but he was never with a real top contender. That is something that deserves mention. Piazza, on the other hand, is another spectacular player. This is not, unlike Griffey, it took him a couple of times before he was voted in, but he is the catcher who has the most home runs ever. When you think of all the catchers that have played baseball for more than 100 years, and he has the most home runs of anyone, that's quite an achievement. Catching is not like playing a field position, sitting on your rump and bending your knees 8-9 innings a day. It's a lot. So I give him a lot of credit.
Well, Murray, I have to take exception with something you say there. You're saying one of the best players in recent years. Well, I mean, at certain positions, as opposed to first base, catcher, shortstop, center field, you have to take defense into account. And while he hit a lot of home runs, he really was not a very good defensive catcher. And, especially when next year, Ivan Rodriguez is a pretty sure shot for a first-time Hall of Fame induction, was clearly a superior catcher who played the exact same era. Piazza was not the best catcher of his era, clearly.
He was a good catcher, not a great catcher, and I agree with you with Rodriguez. He probably will be, let's put it this way, has a good shot at being a first-time winner when he's up for Hall of Fame. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about those who did not make it, and of course...
Let me hit you with the trivia question first. Who's the only team that Mike Piazza played for that has won the World Series since he entered the league in, I think, 92? Just I came up with this.
What, the Mets?
The only franchise he played for that has won the World Series. No, the Mets haven't won it since 86.
Oh, the only franchise he ever played for. So is it L.A.?
No, L.A. hasn't won the World Series since 88. 3 other teams he played for. Wasn't Oakland. It wasn't San Diego. He played for them.
He played for Oakland. He played for San Diego.
He was on the Marlins for like 7 games. When they were in fire sale mode in 98. They got him, and then they traded him again, continuing the fire sale. But there was just a little bit of an overlap. That's the only team that has won
the World Series?
Not that team. They're the only team of all the 5 teams he played for since he came in the league in 92. They're the only one that's won the World Series. And they did it twice.
Well, baseball is a team game, and I take your point. On the other hand, the Hall of Fame honors individuals. And these 2 players, I would say, by any measure, are Hall of Fame caliber. I'll grant you that Piazza was not a number 1 defensive catcher, but he was more than adequate, and I can't think of any team that wouldn't have been delighted to have him and his bat in their lineup every day.
Except for maybe the Texas Rangers during most of that time, because they already had that position full. Well, his bat, he could have been a DH over there. What high school did he go to? Did he go to Phoenixville High School? No, I'm trying to remember. He's from Norristown, or is that Tommy Lasorda? We should know. We're both Philadelphia area guys here.
Piazza is a Norristown boy. He's in the suburbs of Philadelphia. That's right.
I just can't remember what high school he went to. I should be able to know that. Or is he from Phoenixville? And Lasorda, who he was close with, is from Norristown.
By the way, since we're talking a little bit of trivia about these 2 gentlemen, it's my understanding that Griffey is the only player ever drafted number 1 who went into the Hall of Fame. He came right out of high school.
But you know what? Someone else, my friend Charles Schnurr, actually mentioned Piazza, ironically enough, is the lowest drafted player ever to make the Hall of Fame. He's basically the baseball equivalent of Tom Brady.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Good.
Though
I
wouldn't put him.
I want to take a minute on.
Hold on. Let me finish. Tom Brady, of course, has a little more success in the postseason than and he's not at the same level. Brady is at a much higher level. We're talking at the Ken Griffey Jr. level when his name comes up, or quite possibly at the Babe Ruth level when he becomes eligible for the Hall of Fame. You wanted to say something about steroids.
Yeah, I think that three of the very top players, maybe three or four, talking about Martin McGwire, talking about Roger Clemens, talking about Barry Bonds, possibly Kurt Schilling has been mentioned. They were on the ballot, and none of them even got 40% of the vote, and Bonds fell down to 36% of the vote. So it looks like the voters are going to continue to punish the people who either admitted to or didn't admit to taking steroids. What do you think about that?
Well, two things. One, I think Piazza may break the ice because he certainly was rumored that way, and I think Bonds is going to be a little bit rehabilitated this year with his job with the Miami Marlins. Yeah, he's sort of back in the swing of things. Now, McGwire, I think you could say also, you're talking about them as among the best players. I don't think McGwire's at that level. He's closer to Roger Maris than he is to Babe Ruth or Barry Bonds, in my opinion. He's just not at that same level.
He had 3 years of 60 kind of home runs per year. In other words, not only breaking, but matching Babe Ruth's record or Roger Maris's record. And I agree, McGwire was slow. He was not a particularly good fielder. He didn't hit for the average. But those couple of years, and particularly the year where he and Sosa had the home run duel, brought a lot of excitement, which later turned out to be steroid-induced.
Yeah,
so it was exciting as it's going on.
He's basically at the same level as Sosa, maybe a little less obvious because he was hitting homers at the beginning of his career, while Sosa came on sort of in the middle of his career. And, McGwire had the homers, had that great rookie year, and then I think 49 homers, and then was hit with injuries. But the other thing, I just have to also take exception. You talked about batting average. With Bonds, as long as we're talking about him, it's not just the batting average. He's one of the best walkers in history, and it wasn't only because pitchers were afraid of him. He has one of the best eyes of all time.
Well, Bonds and Clemens were so far above on every level, and how good they would have been had they not been on steroids is anybody's guess. And some people say, well, they didn't even start taking steroids until after they'd had 10-plus years that would put them in the Hall of Fame anyway. But, that's a difficult argument to make. I do think Bonds was arguably the best batter of his decades, and Clemens one of the 2 or 3 best pitchers. So It's a shame that they were tarred with this.
It'll happen eventually, I think, for those guys as opposed to Pete Rose, because it's going to be a slippery slope. And, I often wonder with Bonds, was so much of the attention with him because, he may not have become any more better of a player as a percentage, but he was at just such a higher level than some Dominican shortstop who took steroids and eventually, as a backup, was a 215 hitter instead of a 180 hitter because Bonds was lower. No, in all seriousness, you don't care about the guy for whom taking steroids really made the difference in whether his family lived in poverty or not in the Dominican Republic. And it was pretty widespread down there. But it's just Bonds started at such a high level. By the way, check out some pictures of him recently. His head is deflated, and he's just like the Bond, he's just an older version of the Bonds when he started his career. It's very interesting to see.
Well, I remember Bonds as a young player of Pittsburgh, and he was actually thin and lithe looking. By the way, 2 of the names we've mentioned are interesting in that they were the sons of better-than-average players, and I'm talking about Ken Griffey and Barry Bonds. Their fathers were arguably stars in the major leagues before they got there.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there was anyone else among the players who did, and I think Jason Kendall, who somehow got 1 vote. Also, I think he's the son of Fred Kendall or another player. And, of course, Gary Sheffield first came to fame as Dwight Gooden's uncle and then, of course, had a much better career, among the other guys. Let's go through some of the other guys. The third player...
Well, since you brought in football, bring in basketball, and note that Kobe Bryant's dad was an NBA player, not a star, but at least a workaday player for the old 76er team.
And Kobe Bryant, of course, went to the school district where you live, but we won't give out your address. Right. We don't want to encourage groupies here.
And I might say he's a very generous person and donated a gymnasium and swimming area for the newly built school where he was a star.
Yeah, Lower Merion High. And by the way, as soon as he graduated, my high school, Strathaven High School, which is in their league, went back to beating them handily. It was just those couple of years that didn't. Let's go through some of the other players. Number 3, who just missed it with 71.6% of the vote, was Jeff Bagwell. Now that, to me, is an interesting case. He was a solid player, but really, did people ever go to the stadium and say, wow, I got to go to the Vet, an old veteran stadium, or I guess he played during the Citizens Bank Park era, and say, Jeff Bagwell's coming to town. I got to see him. You know, it's just questionable.
He was not a marquee name. That's right. He had a good career. I'm surprised. I'm a little surprised. I don't know his career numbers. I'm a little surprised he's that close to it.
Very solid, but
was his last.
No. The only guy that applied to was the guy who came in 11th, Alan Trammell, who would have been an interesting candidate, in my opinion, if he had played earlier with those same numbers. But he played, he probably was never an all-star because he was overshadowed by Cal Ripken and I guess to some extent Robin Yount, though Yount sort of, I think, moved to outfield, pretty in the middle of his career. But when Ripken started having the numbers he did, it sort of changed the standard. Obviously, Jeter did to some extent, and then A-Rod, who was a shortstop for a lot of career, changed the standard for shortstops. I often think, how much better was Ozzie Smith than Jimmy Rollins, all things considered, if you look at their careers?
Right. I think Trammell maybe had a little more power than those two, although Jimmy Rollins had a 30-homer year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no. I'm saying the standards for shortstops changed so much that, is there real... Jimmy Rollins is a great defensive player. I happen to like Ozzie Smith a lot better as a person than Rollins. Rollins kind of got on my nerves, but it's not an unfair comparison except for the eras that they played in between Smith and Rollins.
Well, eras make a difference. I liked Ozzie because of his ability to do that amazing jump so that he would do a complete somersault in the air. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Yeah, but that's not what, Hall of Fame careers are based on.
That doesn't get you in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it's like karaoke skills shouldn't get you into the Hall of Fame.
He may be one of the very top fielders of the position, though. He really covered the ground.
Yeah.
And I think that was his specialty. My impression, I may be wrong, I think Ripken is a third baseman more.
No, Ripken left. Ripken came up as a third baseman. Okay. You're getting old, Murray, but he was a shortstop because they had... Who was their third? I don't even remember who the third baseman was. He came in the minors as the third, then switched to short, but I can't remember. Was it Doug DeCinces at that time? No, I think he was on the Angels. No, the Orioles had someone at third. I just don't remember who it was when he came in the league in '82. But Trammell, it's not going to happen. He's not a particularly successful career as a manager. The guy who came in fourth is another intriguing person who was overshadowed by Ricky Henderson. Tim Raines came in fourth, and you got to wonder, would he be in the Hall of Fame if Ricky Henderson hadn't existed at the exact same time? He may get in the Hall of Fame still.
Interesting points.
Any thoughts on Raines? We saw a lot of him as Phillies fans because he was with the Expos during the heart of his career.
Who's up next year besides Ivan Rodriguez?
It's Vladimir Guerrero.
Oh, I think Manny Ramirez.
And Manny Ramirez. It's a great year for Latin players next year.
Uh-huh.
I just remember seeing it. I don't have it in front of me, and I'm recording it not with a computer in front of me. But I definitely noticed that the top players are all Latin next year. I think the top three.
Right. So at least it was Ramirez and Rodriguez. Of course, baseball has changed a lot in terms of a very, very high presence of the Latino players, and brought a lot of great stuff to MLB baseball.
I mean, I think it's a coincidence more next year. I don't think it'll be like that in 2018 or 2019. You want to just go through some more of the players? Trevor Hoffman, any thoughts? Overshadowed by Mariano Rivera, probably, during most of his career?
I'm not. Kurt Schilling is interesting.
Yeah,
to me,
he came in sixth.
Since he spent a few years with us and had that famous bloody sock saga in the World Series. In recent years, he's had a lot of ups and downs. He struggled through a cancer fight, and he's gotten a little bit of a reputation for mouthing off in ways that a lot of people don't find that attractive. But he was a great competitor. He probably didn't have the record. When you look at his one-loss record, it doesn't match up to the Hall of Fame. And I'll be surprised if he gets there.
Yeah, I don't think he has the sort of Phil Rizzuto popular support. I just remember, I mean, Angelo Cataldi is obviously very controversial in Philly and just like a lot of people. But I remember hearing him say one time about Kurt Schilling, you know, one day out of five, he's a horse, and the other four of the five, he's a horse's ass. Just a lot of people didn't like him. You know, it's a shame. He was great. I went to the shutout he pitched in the World Series in '93, which was Game 5, keeping the Phillies alive, and he was masterful there. But it's going to be tough. You just wonder if more people liked him in the media, he might have a shot.
I doubt if he put together more than a very, very few 20-game seasons, if any. Do you know?
Yeah, I think that's probably hurting him back.
A couple times.
Yeah, well, he pitched in an area when you had 5-man rotations as opposed to 4, but that's, I guess, why Don Sutton is in, and maybe Schilling isn't. We talked about the guys who came in 7th and 8th, Clemens and Bonds. Edgar Martinez, 9th. I don't know.
Mike Mussina.
Well, Mike Mussina was 10th. You have no thoughts on Martinez or Mussina?
One thing I knew about Mussina, he was a bright guy, and I remember seeing him in the documentary about crossword puzzles and what a crossword fan he was and how smart he was.
Yeah, Stanford grad, I believe.
What's that?
He went to Stanford. He graduated from Stanford, which is a big deal. You know, we talked about Trammell, who came in 11th. Any thoughts on Lee Smith, who we saw a lot of when in the old NL East, Cubs and Cardinals before he went to the Red Sox? Again, probably What's that?
Was he voted on?
No, he's in 12th. It's not going to happen for him unless he gets a career as a manager very quickly. But, you know, I wonder if he was overshadowed a little bit by, well, you can't blame him. You can't, look, Suter and Gossage and, you know, and then Rivera and Hoffman, I guess, were better. No, Hoffman was after him, and Rivera was after him.
I'm old enough to remember when they started with relief pitchers.
Right.
And Philadelphia had one of the earliest ones ever. Can you name him?
No, it was before Tuck McGraw.
1950.
Oh, was it Constantine?
Jim Constantine.
Got an MVP or a Cy Young Award or something?
Jim Constantine pitched in like 72 games out of 154, and it just revolutionized things. And the Yankees had somebody named Joe Page in the late 40s and early 50s. Nowadays, you have the setup man, the 7th inning man, the 8th inning man, and the closer.
And don't forget the left-handed specialist who pitches till he's 47, a Paul Assenmacher type.
For one batter.
Jesse Orozco.
You're right. And, of course, I grew up in a time when the pitcher would do 350 innings and pitch 25 or more complete games. Now you're lucky to get 250 innings, and the leader in complete games might have 5 to 8 games. It's such a different thing. It's a lot harder on the batters because instead of facing a tired pitcher in the 7th and 8th, they're facing a fresh man and a fresh arm each inning, and it makes it a lot harder. Has something to do with the fact that a 285 batting average is probably the equivalent of 310 20, 30 years ago.
Interesting. I just want to go through a few more of the players who are still going to be eligible if you have a few more minutes.
I do want to say one more thing. I think I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Griffey came as close as anyone to being a unanimous selection.
He is it's the highest of all time.
437 votes out of 440. So he was a 99 plus percent choice.
Yeah,
in his first year.
That's a
and that's a nice.
Yeah, it's nice for him. It's a stupid statistic, though. Because can we really take seriously anyone who doesn't vote for Mike Schmidt or George Brett or Rod Carew or other players during our lifetime, or Reggie Jackson?
How about Babe Ruth or Ty Cobb?
Well, it might have been a little different then because they only were allowed to do 5 from all the players to that point. They were in the initial class, but yeah, you shouldn't make something about some sports writer being a wise ass or holding a grudge. They should all be 100%. So I don't think too much. Right. An interesting guy is number 13. I remember going in the 93 playoffs, Phillies versus Braves, with my mom, where the Braves won 14-2. McGriff hit this monstrous homer in the vet. The Phillies eventually won that series, but, he's an intriguing player. He really had the numbers, had 500 homers, but just was, never considered the best in the game. You didn't go to a series just to see Fred McGriff, and considered one of the best guys in the sport. Just an absolute great guy, but nowhere near the Hall of Fame.
You know how I know and admire your mom, and I have to say, I'm amazed she went to a baseball game.
Oh no, we had a good time. Great. By the way, happy birthday in an hour or two. She'll be a big one. I won't give her age.
That's right.
Any thoughts on McGriff?
Let's do this again before.
Oh, wait, do you have another couple minutes? I just want to do a few more minutes with you if you have it.
Okay, let's try.
Okay, because I do want to go through. No thoughts on McGriff. I do have one. I think he could potentially be a little bit of a victim of not really spending his career with one team. 4 years here, 2 years here. Was he a Padre? Was he a Brave? Was he a Blue Jay? What team do you really identify him with? No team really can claim him. That's my thought on him. You got nothing for me on Fred McGriff, crime dog. It's okay. Jeff Kent, good player, overshadowed by Roberto Alomar and probably some other second baseman.
Yeah, I think your approach is very interesting as you are able to kind of tick off who the player was, and the fact that in many cases when you played and who you may be behind is significant in how you're viewed.
Well, let me just go through the rest of them, and this may be the last anyone ever mentions of them, Hall of Fame wise. And stick in your thoughts. Larry Walker, good player, but a lot of those numbers were inflated because he was in Coors Field.
Mm-hmm.
Started with the Expos, one of the better Expos of history. You got nothing for me on Walker. McGwire, we talked about. Gary Sheffield really has the numbers. Steroid era, and may have the same McGriff problem of, not really being identified with one team. It's even more the case for him. He bounced around all the time. Really never spent more than
3 or 4 years. You could make a heck of a team out of these players who are somewhat overshadowed and unlikely to get in, but they would be a tremendous team. You're ticking off a number of really good home run hitters, solid players.
Yeah. Oh, they'd be good. Hey, there are teams that have won the World Series that basically had none or one Hall of Fame player. The 86 Mets, Gary Carter's the only one, I believe. There's another team
the 1950 Phillies won the pennant with probably the weakest team that ever won the pennant, which was shown by the fact that they fell into 5th or 6th place the next year.
Well, you could make a really strong case. No one's going to consider one of them one of the better teams in history, the way they would the 86 Mets, the 88 Dodgers, which were led by Hershiser, and really a bunch of scrubs on that team. Kirk Gibson, by the way, great, home run that he had. Never even made an All-Star team his whole career, even though he won MVP that year. Billy Wagner.
But that's a kind of an iconic film with him limping around the field, right?
Yeah, but that was a weak team that had no one that I believe has no one in the Hall of Fame. Billy Wagner just barely will be eligible for future votes, as will be Sammy Sosa.
I think I read he's the shortest player ever to be a real Hall of Fame candidate.
How tall is he?
5 feet 8 in high heels.
Really? That's interesting, because he threw at 100. He threw at 100.
He was a heck of a closer. I remember him.
Yeah, but it's the Mariano Rivera factor. During that whole 20-year era.
Mariano Rivera is in another league. I remember seeing him in a game in Cleveland where I happened to be sitting like third row behind the home plate.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe the movement on the ball, the velocity, the placement. He struck out the side in the game I saw, and it was very, very impressive.
Yeah.
And that was just one game. He did it, hundreds of times. Let's talk a little about the NFL playoffs.
Wait, Murray. I just gotta stick a few more things in here. Sammy Sosa, we talked about. Let me just mention the guys so we are thorough about this. Who got votes but will not be coming again. And then there's one quirky one here. Jim Edmonds won't be back, even though he got a couple votes. Nomar Garciaparra, who had a great start of his career, was talked about with Ripken and A-Rod, but sort of tailed off.
He got hurt, though, I think. I think he was hurt.
Mike Sweeney, I am amused by. I think he played a little bit for the Phillies at the end of his career. Maybe he was even on the 08 or 09 team. But it's interesting to me, with the Royals having just won the World Series, for so many years, he was the face of the Royals when they stunk. But, I don't know who even voted for him. Probably someone from Kansas City. David Eckstein, a World Series MVP, who was not Jewish, even though people always wonder, with a name like David Eckstein, you got to mention. Jason Kendall, I can't believe anyone voted for him. Now, the last guy, the guy who was last with one vote and will not be coming back, is interesting because I went to a game in Anaheim this year, and it raised the question. I looked at whose numbers were retired. I can't remember offhand. One was Gene Autry's, one was some other guy. I think Nolan Ryan's may have been. It occurred to me.
They retired the owner's number?
I don't remember what it was for him. It was some weird stuff. By the way, great place to see a game. Nicest ushers I've ever been around. Old Orange County type. But you could ask a question. Who had the greatest Angels career in history? And it's the guy who got one vote in the Hall of Fame this year. You could make a strong case. If you look at the entire breadth of his career, Nolan Ryan obviously was great with the Angels, but was only there a couple years. Garrett Anderson, you could make a case for.
I have to plead ignorance. I don't have much sense of his career at all.
Just a solid player.
I have a better sense of Gene Autry's career as a singing cowboy.
Well, he was better among singing cowboys than Aaron Anderson was of baseball. It says something about the Angels franchise, how transient. No person is in the Hall of Fame in an Angels uniform, and it just says something about them. They may have the weakest all-time best player of any team in history. Let's just go through the final. I just want to mention them. We don't have to say anything. Just for the sake of thoroughness here. The guys who didn't get a single vote, worth mentioning. Brad Ausmus, it probably wasn't anti-Semitism that kept him out of the Hall of Fame. He he probably was worthy of 0 votes. Mike Hampton, who had a great year in which he hit 6 home runs, I think he hit, but really not one of the elite.
So you're
pitchers.
saying these are guys who are on the ballots and did not even get a single vote?
Yeah, as opposed to the David Ecksteins and Mike Sweeneys. Luis Castillo was interesting. I believe, he had the winning hit in one of the Marlins World Series victories. I think Edgar Renteria was the guy who did it twice with different teams, but I think Castillo did once. I have to check on that. Then there was Mike Lowell, who was a Marlin, Cuban-American Marlin, or half Cuban-American. Solid guy in the clubhouse, but no. Troy Glaus, who had a few really good years. And then the last 2 guys are just interesting because I just wonder sometimes, why do they even put them on the ballot just to embarrass them? And it's Randy Wynn and Mark Grudzielanek, who was one of the hardest to spell Hall of Fame eligible players in all time. That's about it.
That's really amazing that anybody would put their names on the ballot. What are they thinking? Or maybe what are they smoking? There's no way they have Hall of Fame careers.
I mean, where do you cut it off? I mean, Jeff Geary probably will not appear on a Hall of Fame ballot. He may still be in the league for all I know. But you got to wonder about that. All right, Murray, any final thoughts on this year's Hall of Fame induction?
No, I just want to say I do think that you're not going for numbers, you're going for quality. And these 2 elected are really quality. I grant you that Piazza was not a top flight defensive player, but when you look at his overall, what he brings to a team, and the greatest home run hitter of any catcher in 100+ years, he's a great choice. And as I said at the outset, Ken Griffey's numbers are amazing, even though he lost many games due to injury because he was such an all-out player. He would catch that ball even if it meant running into the center field fence at 100 miles an hour. So I'm very, very pleased with both of those selections.
No disrespect to Piazza, but he's about average for a Hall of Famer. Griffey was elite, and the most interesting thing about these two, neither ever won a World Series, and one is the highest drafted player of all time, and one is the lowest drafted player of all time. One more Hall of Fame thought. We're going to have the football Hall of Fame voting sometime in the next year. I forget when it occurs. Brett Favre obviously will get in, but you're a guy from a Philly sports fan as well. Will Terrell Owens get in on the first ballot is the question on a lot of people's minds. What's your thought on that?
Who was the question? I missed it. Who?
Well, Brett Favre obviously will get in on the first ballot,
right.
But will Terrell Owens get in on the first ballot?
Well, I got to say, Terrell Owens in that great year with the Eagles, I think it was 2004, was the best wideout I ever saw.
Yeah.
And I have to say that in that playoff game, when he had a broken something, ankle or shin bone or something,
the Super Bowl,
he still managed to catch about 9 passes. I think he was spectacular for the 2 or 3 years. He was clearly a head case, and he was a failure of the Eagles to be able to manage him after that year. And you may remember he's out there doing sit-ups and talking to the news media and holding out and all. It was a shame. But he had a spectacular year, and his talents were amazing. Now, there are other players that are playing right now that I think are at his level.
Oh, yeah.
But in the year, he's like, I think 2004, he's 10-plus years ago. He was at the top at that time. There are other players who have come along who I think are as good or even better, but he stood out, and I don't think he's going to get into the Hall of Fame immediately, if at all, because he had a lot of enemies, and he was really a difficult guy.
Yeah,
if you got on the wrong
My
side
thought on that, we'll conclude with this, is he will get in on the Hall of Fame because he was such an oddball, as opposed to Schilling, who just really wasn't well liked that much. Just popular, but T.O. was so nuts, such an outlier, that I'm thinking it might not even be held against him. And he will get in on the first ballot as one of the greatest receivers in history.